So one of the issues that you likely run into in Valorant is that you seem to struggle entirely when trying to attack. Personally, I believe that attacking in Valorant can feel like the more difficult side because when your team is on attack, that's when it really shows how your team is able to work together to accomplish a goal. Think about it. Although teamwork is obviously important on both sides, you can oftentimes just make things work on defense by just winning your solo duels. Your Jett bought an operator and found an early solo pick, and she didn't really receive much help from anybody else to get this pick, and then your Reyna also took a solo duel and found her pick, and there's not a lot of teamwork involved in that. And although on defense you shouldn't bank on the fact that you'll be able to take solo duels and get away with it, this is very much how many of the games, especially in lower rank lobbies, feel like they play out. However, on offense, you might be able to find an entry frag alone if the defense is taking those duels like we were just talking about, but if the defense is playing a bit more safely, you kind of are going to need your teammates' utility to help you out. Things like Sova's drone or Astra's smokes are fundamental resources that make it much easier to account for all of the variables that there are on attack. This is likely part of the reason that you're struggling on attack in your games, because on attack it's very important to use your utility intelligently and take certain precautions so your team doesn't get picked off. One of the most frustrating things for me as a player, and leave a comment if you agree with this, is when things aren't going well on an attacking half and somebody suggests to you as a team that you should default. Now, the reason that this is frustrating to hear is because I know how this ends. I've seen it before, you've seen it before. When players call for a default without actually knowing how to default, all that's really going to happen to your team is they're going to spread out their resources, peek angles that they shouldn't peek, and get themselves killed. Don't get me wrong, defaulting is an incredibly important part of the game, but you can't just go default without purpose. You need to understand what your goals should be on these maps that you're playing on. For example, what is a default going to look like on Bind, and what is the purpose of this default going to be? Well, a pretty standard default on Bind would look something like this. You'd have your Raze Roomba hookah at the start of the round, maybe Sova recons long and him and Jett try to work that ultimate orb, your Astra smokes U-Haul and holds for the short push, and your Cypher cams out towards showers for info. This way you can gather information along all 4 of the enemy choke points, and your team can grab territory to start out the round. Create some pressure, and then once you grab that territory, you can determine where you want to go. Now, notice how in this scenario, all of the territory that you look to gather info at, you are using utility to do so. We're not just dry swinging all of these angles, we're using our utility to make it safe. This is one of the reasons that I mentioned before that I don't really die to operators all that often. It's because I'm aware of most, if not all of the op angles on the maps that players will like to take advantage of, and I will either use utility to peek those angles, or I will jiggle/jump peek those angles as to not get myself killed early on into the round. Keep in mind that the key point with these defaults here though is not to push the site, it's to gather information and gain some sort of advantage in the round. Whether that advantage is a pick or an ultimate orb or just space, this is something that takes place before the execute. And by understanding this, there are some things that we can figure out, which is that there are certain lines on the map that probably should not be crossed when you're defaulting. Now, those lines change slightly depending on the utility that you use, but for the most part, on a map like Split, this is what those lines are going to look like. This applies to both the defense and the offense, by the way. The lines vary slightly, but they're more or less the same. Now, this might seem like it's fairly conservative, and that is the point. You're trying to gather information as the round starts without getting yourself killed. It's supposed to be safe. Now, like I mentioned earlier, your default is really going to depend on what map that you're playing on. On a map like Ascent, I know a 1-3-1 default is pretty common because teams really like to prioritize mid control. But on a map like Icebox, it's a lot less common to place that much pressure towards mid, and instead something like a 1-1-3 default or a 2-1-2 default would likely be more common. As you could imagine though, if we went over every single map, this would take easily over an hour. So we're not going to be able to cover all of that in this YouTube video, but if you want to see that kind of content that emphasizes how to play on every single map, we recently uploaded a bunch of really awesome map breakdowns to the website that will easily help you improve your attacking game. Take a listen to this clip from the Ascent breakdown where I talk about why defaults can be so important on offense. Sorry. If we have as an offense, will they want to push this? We walk up here. We try to run through this. They have 2 people here. It's not going to work out. And the reason they can do this is because they have Killjoy set up over here. Sova could even be over here if he wants to at this point. She has an alarm bot in mid. She's a turret over here in spawn. Like, there's no threat of them coming through here, right? Maybe it should probably even have a molly like right here. Like, well, they're not B, guys. They're not mid. They're A. They have to be. So you guys try to run in. You get Phoenix mollied. You get Astra sucked. Sova's up here shooting shock darts at you or something. Like, this doesn't look like something that's fun to push into. You're just gonna get rolled. So what you'll generally do to counteract this, obviously, is like you can come over here at the start of the round. It's like, let's just drone through B main. Okay, sweet. We got B main control. Okay, there's a turret. We killed the turret. Nice, turret's out. And then it's like, okay, maybe we double back. Like, we reclaim mid control or something. We still have our turret to hold this. Maybe Killjoy even like pushed up turret this or something. That's something you could do. She can even hold this in case they try to like re-clear or something. You guys come back through mid. You have your smokes, you know. It's less one-dimensional. Now you've taken out the turret. They need to worry about that. Smoke here. Maybe you want to like push up, feel it out, kill the alarm bot. Okay, sweet. Alarm bot's dead. Now decide, what do you want to do? You want to go A? Sweet, we can go A. We can go split A or something, right? Or you want to go B? Yeah, we can push up B. We have the smoke here already. Like, let's push up, take this territory. You know, you pick off Killjoy or something. You're able to push up through here. You get a split going on, right? This is like easily something that you could do. You can slow play this. You can take out the like defensive utility that's giving them all their info, and then you could like spread out their defense more. Because after you take that down that alarm bot, they're gonna have to rotate a player around here, right? They can't just leave this here. Like, they have to play somebody here. They have to play somebody like towards spawn maybe. They do like one of these or something. They rotate players like this. Like, they're going to have to spread out their resources a little bit more because they don't just have an alarm bot and a turret covering half the map. Now they have to worry about all this. Longer clip, but hopefully this does a good job of painting a picture to you just how much value a Sentinel can really provide to their team on defense and what is actually happening when you push sites and notice that their entire team was there. You'll hear people oftentimes say things such as, these guys rotate really fast, but that's not the full story. They most of the time rotate really fast because you are not putting in the work to clear out this utility, providing them with information. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't need to default every single round. Many games you'll find success without defaulting at all, but I want you to recognize what an actual default looks like and why slow playing around like this could be actually very beneficial for you when done correctly. I want to provide you all with some helpful guidelines for every map though, to give you an idea of what lines I would not recommend crossing on offense if you're pushing something solo. I want to do this because it seems like many players have no sense of risk at all and they'll just wander in aimlessly, but I also do want you to recognize these lines change from game to game and round to round. Sometimes you gain information throughout the round that signifies you might have an opening to lurk in, or your team will create enough pressure in one place that will give you a chance to push up yourself. These aren't be-all end-all lines, but they're very good guidelines for players who find themselves getting picked off frequently in rounds on attack. Keep in mind, you should still use your utility when approaching these lines, but you should most of the time absolutely not cross these lines unless you have a good reason to do so. Once again, putting a disclaimer here that these are lines for when your team is spreading out or playing for info. I just have to say this because I know that somebody's going to leave a comment saying, how do we get on site if we don't leave B main? If you're executing, it's different, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Now, keep in mind, it may also be safer to go further on some of these lines depending on what utility you use. Obviously, a Sova drone is going to get you a lot more space than a Phoenix flash would, but honestly, just understanding how these things work is going to be a massive help for you to not get yourself killed in these rounds. You'll also notice that some of these lines are going to require you to take a duel to reach them, and this is sort of what I mean why it's important for you to use utility. If you walk past any of these lines solo without using your utility and there's no pressure on the map to set you up to lurk into enemy territory, you're kind of just trolling. You'll notice that we placed a large emphasis on this topic throughout the video though, and the reason we focused on it so much is because staying alive is very, very important for you as a player. It sounds obvious, but I actually had a conversation about this with a SkillCapped viewer the other day, and I thought it would be good to share with you all this perspective. Because here's the thing, trading kills is absolutely part of Valorant at a fundamental level. Players are going to die in the game, and that's not even always a bad thing. Not every single death that a player has is going to be a bad death. For example, if a Jett dashes onto site and ends up getting killed before she's able to get one, is that fundamentally a bad thing? No, it's not actually. Because if she was able to dash onto site and help our team grab that space, as long as she's traded out, it could be considered completely worth it. Of course, she wasn't the one who got the kill, but somebody else got the kill because of what she did, so at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter all that much. She did her job, but it's really important to me that you all understand this correctly because I don't want to be responsible for a ton of people baiting their teammates in lower ranks. The reason it's important for you to stay alive longer in the round in your games and don't get yourself picked off is number one, because you want to make sure that you actually have value in the round. And it's really hard to get value when you get picked very early on. But number two, it's really important because the less players that are alive, the less variables that there are for you to deal with as a player. Think about it. When there are 5 players alive on the enemy team, there are a lot of variables that you have to deal with. You have a large map. All of these agents have their own abilities they can use on the map, and it's a lot to deal with. That's why so much of these early defaults is just about gathering information, feeling things out, preparing yourself for what variables you could possibly be facing in each area of the map. But as players start to get traded out and suddenly you're down to a 2v2, the variables are a lot less overwhelming. Now you have a combination of 2 agents and you know their last relative location. Using this information, you can more easily determine where they can come from and what utility you should be expecting. And if you're a smart player like our SkillCapped.com subscribers, you can develop a strong game plan for how to prepare for these variables. This is why it's so important for you to stay alive during these rounds and not throw your life away by making dumb mistakes early on in the round. It's because you as a player, if you really believe you're better than the rank that you're in, should want to be the one who is left in those 2v2s or 1v1s. Now, what I mentioned earlier is that you shouldn't just be baiting your team to accomplish this. Obviously, it's important to work with your team, and if your team wants to push a site together and you're playing duelist, you should likely be the one to initiate that push. But the problem is you can't entry as a duelist if you don't get the utility that you need to feel comfortable entering. So yeah, if your team is doing all the things to support your entry, then by all means, absolutely entry for those guys. But don't just sprint into sight before your team has dropped any smokes or flashed for you. That just sounds like a really excellent way to get yourself killed for nothing. So I think that that's what I want to say to wrap up this video. Now, obviously, I'm not telling you to just bait your team so that you can be the last one alive, but what I'm saying is that if your team is not doing what they can do to help you entry onto site, it's not worth risking your life for you to entry onto site. Sometimes making these videos is really rough because there's a lot of asterisks throughout this video. Like with the default lines or staying alive part, the more in depth we go with these videos, the more things start to depend. That's always the response that people hate getting when they ask questions too. It depends, but that's just honestly the answer. Luckily on the website, we're able to go a lot more in depth on these tactics and the nuances of the game. So if you wanted to see any of the attacking breakdowns for all of the maps like we showed earlier, be sure to check out SkillCapped.com, link in the description below. As always though, my name is King and we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.